Thank you, sir. Well, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to have a little fun. Oh, welcome, Professor. Please find a seat. We're going to have a little bit of fun here. We're going to talk a little bit off the reservation in two specific factors. Number one is we're concentrating on Title 32. Now, why Title 32? 32 is one of the pay grades within the U.S. military. There are a whole bunch. Most of you are familiar with Title 10. Many of you may have come from Title 10 or are in Title 10. We're going to talk about Title 32 and some of the lesser-known stuff that's going to bring a whole new series of cyber solutions to the table nationally. We all know this quote by Yamamoto. It's been used over and over and over again. I've even enjoyed some of the academic discussions as to whether he actually said it. But that being said, I keep hearing this too every once in a while within the cyber community. I've been officially part of the cyber community since the year 1999 and served on my first National Cyber Council in 2002. So from that perspective, we keep talking about when is there going to be this act of war or this entity that unifies all of our forces in cyber to now come up and defeat all of our enemies. Where is our sleeping giant? And it's a legitimate question. We are the United States of America. We have been thumping our chests for most of our lives and going back generations pretty much to World War II and even before that in saying we are technological excellence. We are a free society. We are a democracy or a republic, depending on how you want to debate and or define those items. But the simple reality and truth is we should not be on the losing side of a technology-based war domain. So where's our sleeping giant? Well, who is the sleeping giant? If you're talking about a sleeping giant, I'm looking at them. I'm looking at a university that creates them, but just as importantly, some of you may have read a book, and I'm not here to promote my book or anybody else's. There was a book that came out about 15 years ago called Freedom's Forge, and it told a very, very interesting and unusual story about World War II. Where it told it from the perspective not of the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines and Coast Guard that were dealing with the actual combat theaters, which tends to be what we study in American history. Instead, Freedom's Forge is about all of the the private sector corporations that entirely gutted their operations to subordinate themselves under the government and align with the military to create a factory-esque structure that has been unequaled in human history. We industrialized this nation around warfare in a 3-year period. And this book includes statistics, and I've heard these statistics debated, but statistics in saying we actually sustained more casualties domestically in factory accidents, because this was long before OSHA, than we did on the battlefield within American troops. It's an interesting backstory, and I highly recommend it. But like so many other things in warfare, and much like the bomber mafia discussion from this morning, we can learn a great deal by going back just 100 years, couple hundred years, and looking at lessons learned. And the lessons learned here in World War II was we not only had the most kick-ass military on the planet at the point that we were at our pinnacle in World War II, able to do the kind of things that we were able to do, but it was also because the military was in deep coordination with the private sector, and the private sector was churning out tens of thousands of aircraft and hundreds of ships and all of the fuel and all of the supplies to keep the war machine going. Well, doesn't that sound like something we could do in cyber? So then what would be the challenges of doing such a thing in cyber, of creating a World War II-esque concept? And I've heard speakers, by the way, talk about, again, that we need a cyber Pearl Harbor. I could argue that we've had 50 cyber Pearl Harbors at this point. We have them almost weekly. I know a number of state agency heads. I moderated 2 of the 3 panels for New York state agencies last year, and I am here to tell you they're terrified. The ransomware attacks and whatnot are nonstop. Where are we going to find all these resources? So our first challenge is we need a lot of cyber people in uniform. Again, if we're going to use the World War II model, we need them. But where are we going to get them? Because if they're in uniform and we train them in cyber, we lose them almost instantly because they realize that they can go and earn 6 figures on the real world. So you sit there going, the Pentagon and our federal government can't afford these people. The private sector scoops them up as quickly as the Pentagon trains them. Your other situation, I call it the 800-pound gorilla, and I'm one of the ones that I'm going to be the unpopular guy that actually made this slide. This is what nobody likes to talk about. This is what a second lieutenant makes, and this is what a kid with no college education but 1 cyber certification makes. And the kid with the cyber certification makes more and is in no physical danger and goes home every night and has no PT tests. And you compare the two. A buddy of mine who retired from the Navy minus a limb, figure given your all for king and country, was asked by the Navy to come back in for cyber. And he looked at them and he said, you do realize I have a wife and children now, and you are asking me to take a 90% cut in pay to come back into the Navy as an intelligence and cyber officer. 90% cut in pay. Yeah, and this isn't to shame anybody who has the great honor of wearing the uniform serving our country. It's the most noble cause that I can possibly conceive of. And yet, how do you argue with that? How does one go back to their spouse or their children and go, I'm not going to be able to pay for you to go to college because I need to serve our country? And a lot of people do that, but that's a very, very tough value proposition. But we have a second challenge, and that is that unlike the European Union, who came up with a privacy law that suddenly unifies all of their law enforcement and whatnot, and it ain't perfect, but it's there. In the US, on the other hand, because our Congress probably couldn't pass much on a cocktail napkin these days, and I'm not taking a political position, I'm just saying, we've got the states now stepping up, each creating their own privacy law. And to give you all an idea of what a big headache that is, I was an SME consultant for the VA on the interoperability of soldier, sailor, Marine, airman, guardsmen, and guardians records. The transition of them from VA facility to VA facility, as well as VA facility to civilian doctor and civilian facilities, and the interoperation of that data. We had, on our development team, I had some of the finest, extraordinary military and civilian cyber people one could possibly imagine. We solved it in weeks with regards to the guidance and whatnot, but we didn't. And the reason I say we didn't is that there were 2 people on our 9-person team that were attorneys. And what the attorneys brought back to us is, nope, you can't do any of it, because the VA was dealing with an interesting issue and going, yeah, if we have a soldier in North Florida and he or she needs to see a specialist and they're referred to a VA facility in southern Georgia, just a 20-minute drive away, we can't port the records across the state line, because even though we are a federal agency, we would be violating privacy laws either in Florida or Georgia or both. And now we have to go back to the patient and start having them create more paper trail to get this information around. So the federal government has a real challenge here with regards to any federal solution around the cyber protection of the states and territories and the infrastructure, because of the conflicting laws. And then there's one other tripwire, something there that you might see in bold and italic. Whoop, wrong direction. And that's the bear trap called Posse Comitatus. Dum, dum, dum. Posse Comitatus is a law passed after the Civil War and the Reconstruction, which basically forbids anybody in a military uniform from acting in a law enforcement capacity inside a U.S. state or territory. Well, that's a heck of a barrier. And what that means basically is, for those of you that are Title 10 or federal agency cyber responders, if the emergency is inside a U.S. state or territory and is not a federal system, if you put your hands on it, some snarky lawyer, depending on which political party is in charge in that state versus the White House, is going to sue over posse comitatus and claim that the federal government is overextending and attempting to police the records inside the states. So this becomes yet another barrier that creates a real headache for any kind of coordinated national response in cyber. So we have an interesting solution within the Title 32. Now, Title 32 of the US Code is made up of two distinct forces. Actually, three if you count the senior military colleges, and I do. But the two main ones that everybody knows about, or most people know about, are the National Guard, which of course is made up of the Air National Guard and the Army National Guard. And the second is the State Defense Forces, also known as State Guards. Every state that has one, they call them a little different. I served in the New York Guard. For instance, here in Maryland, we have several brave men and women from the Maryland Defense Forces, and Maryland calls them Defense Forces. Generically, we call them State Defense Forces, or SDFs. This is not a bunch of yahoos or a club getting together, drinking beer and shooting cans in the woods, wearing camouflage uniforms. If you are in the National Guard, Army or Air, and you are commissioned or enlisted, your paperwork is signed off and approved by the Adjutant General of that state or territory and the Governor of that state or territory. If you are Army or Air National Guard and then transition to a federal role, which many do, then you get a secondary commission that becomes a reserve commission in the federal forces, the Title X forces. Most of you understand and have experienced this and know more about it than I do. But in the State Defense Forces, we stop at the governor. So, for instance, my commission in New York was signed by the Adjutant General and the Governor of the state of New York, just like a National Guard officer's. But I don't have one signed by the President of the United States because State Defense Forces cannot be deployed, in most cases, outside of the state of their service. And that's very important. It becomes the in-house state professional military. Now, State Defense Forces, when we talk about Title 10, Title 5, Title 32, State Defense Forces effectively, and by the way, there's Title 22, there are a bunch. State Defense Forces are uniformed military personnel. I would tell you that about half to 3/4 of our numbers, and this varies state to state, are prior service in the federal military. And that's fine. They tend to become our most learned leaders and trainers and mentors. But then you have subject matter experts that the State Defense Force is able to recruit off the street for specific needs of the command, give commissions or enlistments to, and put them to work for the state where they have no federal commitment. They don't have to leave their day job. They will never be deployed overseas. And that basically, when the balloon goes up, as we call it, or as I also like to call it, when the proverbial fecal matter hits the variable oscillation device, and the Adjutant General and the Governor, you hear the Governor declare an emergency under Stafford Act, all of a sudden these folks become activated, and we are paid per our military rank. When I've been activated, I've been paid as a lieutenant colonel. If you were a sergeant, you'd be paid as a sergeant, and so on. And of course, there are advancement opportunities and the like. But it gives a tool set to the Adjutant General and the Governor. And every state is doing it differently, which is part of the wonderful cornucopia it is, because I'm here to tell you from the national leadership side of all of the State Defense Forces, it really is a rainbow. It really is. Every state defense force is entirely different. Those of you that are going to ask, well, of the 54 states and territories, how many state defense forces there are currently 24. My expectation is within the next 10 years there will be 54, because it's the most cost-effective thing the taxpayers can do. State defense forces are generally not paid for drill. I'm going to say that again. Generally not paid to drill, because people go into the State Defense Forces not to make money. It's not a career move. Their career is their work environment when their drill weekend is done. They are paid in a lot of states when activated, and particularly during a federal emergency. In New York, we have about 40 or 50 of our SDF people basically caring for the migrants in the hotels and the like. And they are all being paid on a federal activation per their pay grade. But it's DHS's other military asset. And the reason I say it's DHS's is that state defense forces do not have a combat role. What we do is support the heck out of the National Guard. We consider National Guard our brothers and sisters. And basically, sustaining the National Guard's combat mission is the #1 thing for us, keeping in mind we're never going to get on a C-17 and actually fly into the theater. But our crews can load the C-17 and assist the ramp master and do cleanup so they can get out and taxi faster. So there are all these augmentee jobs that, depending on the state, depending on the adjutant general, you end up with all of these extraordinary opportunities where the taxpayers are truly served by the military. And for those of you in the Title X military or the National Guard, we're making you all look pretty good. I will tell you that a national statistic that I was told was that over 10% of the camouflaged uniformed professionals at the immunization and testing sites nationally were State Defense Force personnel. And again, why not? As far as we're concerned, for you Air and Army National Guard, if you've been downrange, you've done your bit for king and country. If you don't want to be activated for that mission, and a State Defense Force person does want to be, pay that person to go sit there pushing people through these immunization and testing sites, or whatever the mission is. But we end up with numbers of these things around the country, and yes, some of the state guards are quite active in cyber. Texas State Guard is actually under a minor investigation because one of the things that their cyber team pulled off was they found some social media chat posting room sort of environments where some of the migrants on the other side of the wall were coordinating where the openings were in the fence. And so they started in Spanish posting their own fake ones that were leading them right to where the National Guard and State Guard were waiting. So the federal government turned around and said that's a violation of the Fourth Amendment because you put these folks under surveillance. And of course what Texas's military leadership said, well, yes, but they're in Mexico. they're not US citizens. And we gave them information basically it's no different than trying to catch a pedophile. You put some bait out, if you're law enforcement, and see if they take the bait, and now you make the arrest. They were doing the same thing. But that's one for an after-hours bourbon sort of discussion. So 10% roughly of the total COVID response nationally with regards to the immunization and testing was us. That being said, we get 0% of the DHS budget. Now, if that sounds like the classic United States Marine Corps thing of we do 86% of the combat missions and we get X, single-digit percentage of the Pentagon budget, it really isn't, because we don't want the Pentagon budget because we don't have a Pentagon mission. The Pentagon is warfighting. Remember, State Guard, we stop at the governor and what the governor needs us to do for the people of our state, our homes and our communities. Those are, of course, California State Guard. It just became a mechanism to take downstate firefighters that were already trained, already certified, and under state statutes in most states, you can take up to 30 days of military leave from any employer and go right back to work. And so the State Defense Force allowed them to go upstate and fight the fires under federal money. And the taxpayers didn't have to pay for any training, uniforms, anything else, because it was all just simply taken care of, and these folks knew what they were doing. So the bottom line is you've got state or territorial troops to use. And when we talk about State Defense Force people not being paid for drill, this starts becoming the Maryland tag. The Adjutant General here actually stated at one point that the State Defense Force in this state is the most cost-effective force that the Maryland military has. And that's because we cost almost zero money to the taxpayers because of the unpaid drill. And then at the point that we're stood up, we're being paid with federal dollars. under a state of emergency. So it's a very unique solution. But here's the thing. I had a second lieutenant. I'm part of MCPA and have been for a bunch of years. I live in the Tampa region. We have a vibrant chapter just outside the gates of MacDill Air Force Base. Some of you may have heard of it. There are some interesting goings on there, I hear. That was, by the way, a joke for those that know MacDill. It's the home of US SOCOM and CENTCOM. But there are a lot of cyber folks there. And I had drinks one night, because we always finish our MCPA thing with drinks. I guess we all get thirsty. And the second lieutenant actually started tearing up. He was about to graduate from the USF with his master's in cybersecurity. And he said, "Sir, I have to leave the Guard." LT, why? He goes, "I enlisted when I was 17. My parents were okay with it. By 18, I deployed to Iraq as an infantryman." He said, "I came home from Iraq as an E5, having started college courses online." He said, "Then I deployed to Afghanistan, finished college while I was in Afghanistan, came back in E6 with a bachelor's degree. The Guard immediately put me in OCS. I spent a year going one weekend a month to Guard OCS training." He said, "Now I'm a second lieutenant, infantry." He said, "I'm graduating next Monday with a master's in cybersecurity. I'm now 33 years old. I have a wife and 3 children, and I earn $130,000 a year working as an associate CISO at a bank." He goes, "All it's going to take is a board sergeant in St. Augustine to sign the wrong form, and my butt is downrange as an infantry second lieutenant." He said, and I went and asked them, I said, "Give me a cyber slot," and the Guard said, "We don't have the slots available at this time for your grade and whatnot." And he goes, "So I have to separate from the military." Well, I'm going to make a statement. Some of you are going to agree with me and some of you aren't, but I'm going to tell you just in my some 20 to 30 years of cybersecurity practitioner that a person with a combat infantry badge and a master's in cybersecurity is the most dangerous mofo you're ever going to see on a keyboard. Because you are talking an individual that has been conditioned to such levels of hypervigilance and distrust of anything and everything downrange that this person is going to be constantly awake and watching, and this person is also going to be vicious when they attack. So, as I briefed a 2-star general in Washington on this, one of the things that I said is, the nation lost the day he got his DD-214. The nation lost. We all lost. Because there are 10,000 more of him or her. And we're losing them because we're losing them to the private sector. So in the Title 32, we actually have a very straightforward and completely viable solution per the World War II function. Let's bring the public sector and the private sector together, and actually, instead of just giving voice to that or using the classic graphic of the handshake, let's actually work together. We can take civilian cyber talent. We can take somebody earning $400,000 a year at the bank who otherwise sits there over the dinner table going, "Why the hell isn't the government protecting our records better?" and say, "Look, you always wanted to serve in the military, or maybe you have past service in the military. Raise your right hand, come into the SDF. You will never be deployed outside the US or even outside your home state. And deployments are within the state are entirely voluntary, and you'll be paid for them. Not that it matters if you're really in a $400,000 a year job. But the point being, you don't have to give up the job, but we get your skill sets, and we, the government, the public, don't have to pay for them because the private sector already did. And that individual gets to earn rank and wear the uniform and serve proudly. And when the balloon goes up, they can be activated voluntarily to go work with a state agency or whatnot and be a problem solver. And some of what we're rolling out now in the Title 32 is combined threat intelligence platforms on our smart devices so that when the balloon goes up in the state of Idaho, somebody here in the state of Maryland can sit there going, "Huh, We saw something like that last week in my civilian job. Hold on. Let me ask them to put something in the sandbox and let me take a look. And now we have public sector. We have a soldier sitting at their desk at their day job, not costing the public anything, that just gets a buzz on their smartphone and solves something for some state agencies 1,000 miles away that needed the help. This is the solution. Because the reality is, he or she could then put their smartphone down and go right back to what they were doing if it's something they've seen. But this is true collaboration and coordination of your cyber talent. But the other thing is, we can take veterans. I'm about to publish a book called Cyber for Soldiers, and I'm not here to promote the book, but what I am here to tell you is, my hypothesis, and it was part of my master's thesis, is I would rather take 111 Bravos, that's infantry, enlisted, okay, with no college education, no cyber or IT background whatsoever, than 100 people with IT degrees and train them in cyber. I am telling you, the infantry will do better. And the reason is, it's not about the information. The information is, as far as I'm concerned, any infantry person, cyber is just another weapon system to learn, another listening post or another weapon system. And that's what they have to learn. But the issue is, again, the hypervigilance, the attitude, the concept that we're military, what I just saw won't fly, I need to report it to somebody. That's the kind of stuff that with the veterans I think that we're going to get, and why we're running programs through Sagus right now to take veterans with no cyber background whatsoever and get them at least to the lowest level of our badge level, which most of you know as Security Plus. Just get them to that level, and now they have a career in the public sector, or excuse me, in the private sector, or they can go to work in the public sector too. So we're going to do that at Sagus with 10,000 veterans, and we're going to put them through that training. Now, of course, this is I should actually start with also Sagus. What is Sagus? Okay, those of you in the National Guard would know of Naugus. Those of you that have served in any of the military forces know that every individual military force has a non-for-profit association that is aligned with that force. So, for instance, the Army has the AUSA, and the Air Force has the Air Force Association. The National Guard has Naugus, the National Guard Association of the U.S. Sagus is the State Guard Association of the U.S. There is one big difference between those other associations and Sagus. In that state defense forces, we don't have the big federal schools. We can't send a whole bunch of our people to Fort Gordon or now Fort Eisenhower and get them cyber trained and the like, because they are not as state, effectively if you're in a state defense force, you are considered a state agency employee. That doesn't get you over to any of the regular Army or Air Force training. So what Sagus does is we effectively act like a TRADOC for the Title 32 forces. Not just State Guard. At any given point, we have hundreds of National Guard in our schools, because National Guard have now figured for the state missions, Sagus is training badge programs and certifications on disaster response models. We have engineering, we have medical, we have communications for disaster, the stuff that they need to know on the ground within the states. So that's what Sagus is and what we do. And I call this a call to arms because I know there are a number of you in here in civilian clothing right now that may not be happy about being in civilian clothing. In the sense that you're either ex-federal military and going, I got a DD-214 or an NG-22, and my military career is over. No, it isn't if you don't want it to be. There are 24 states and territories right now, including this one, and there are some brave men and women in this room from Maryland's Defense Force. They kind of stand out. They're wearing camouflage, but also when you look at SDF uniforms, you'll see on most SDFs, instead of the U.S. flag, they're wearing the flag of the state that they are commissioned or enlisted in. A differentiation that's similar to the state police. In most states, they wear the state flag on the right shoulder because, again, they are state agency aligned. But the simple reality and truth is we want you. We will take disabled veterans. We will take disabled non-veterans with cyber backgrounds. If you have a cyber background, we can teach you the wearing the uniform part. Our basic training lasts 1 week in most SDFs. 1 week, because it's really learn to wear the uniform. The missions you're going to be on are going in and out of air-conditioned buildings. And the simple reality and truth is that we're not at 1 weekend a month and a couple weeks over the summer going to change your weight and height and physique. But then again, we're never going to put you on a mission where your physique is going to be a particularly big game changer. Thus, again, why we can work with the disabled. So what this is basically a call to arms for those that want to wear the uniform again or want to wear it at all, that this really is an opportunity to do that. Yeah. I'm fairly certain he was misquoted and there was a missing line. So, yeah, that's happening. And so our sleeping giant is on its way. I am available for questions.
Go ahead and take a question.
Sir.
I got a question. In one of your slides, you had picked out Louisiana.
I'm sorry, sir?
In one of your slides, you picked out Louisiana with a different color. I was wondering if you just picking on Louisiana or what's going on.
Oh, I constantly pick on Louisiana, but as we've established, I'm a former resident, so I'm allowed. No, I think you are referring, Professor, to...
Privacy law, probably.
Yeah, the privacy law slide. And what we were illustrating there is just
The one with that color.
Yes, it's just levels of privacy laws as they existed when this graphic... As of the point that this was made, no, task force, no, it says that Louisiana has a task force. So, no, it doesn't say that Louisiana has nothing, it just...
Oh, well, somebody just reminded me, Hawaii is also the same number. So, okay.
Yep.
One other question.
Yes, sir.
Can the defense force, right?
Yes.
Okay. Can they use state military reservations for the training?
We do.
Okay.
In fact, I had a private office at Camp Smith in New York for about 10 years. Yeah, the military, the state military invests in the state defense force because part of what we were doing in New York, the National Guard was deployed downrange. They needed a professional military and offices that were just not going anywhere to be able to run things.
So I had recently a funny conversation with a contractor in my workspace who I believe claimed to be a Guard member from Wisconsin.
Okay.
He said that he had civilian non-uniform compatriots on that Guard who had their top secret federal clearance maintained by the Guard. Is that something that you're familiar with?
Well, I can tell you that there are some SDFs, Ohio is probably the biggest, where they have a cyber component that, yes, they wear polos. They do not wear conventional military uniforms, even though they are commanded by a retired Army 06. But with regards to upkeep of clearances and things like that, that tends to be more of an individual within their chain of command, as well as whatever their employment is, as to who's sponsoring those clearances. SDFs do not generally sponsor or have any clearances unless the individual already had one, simply because we don't do federal missions, and the clearances are required to access federal equipment, whereas state agencies have no such requirements. So instead, for us, it's more background checks and other such certifications. I think there was one more. And
do you have a PIV or attack, or how do you deal with CUI at all?
Well, okay.
Actually, that's a pretty deep conversation. Do you
Yes.
mind carrying it after
No,
the
no,
fact?
no
Because
problem.
we
I know
gotta
we're running
continue on
behind.
the agenda here.
Okay.
It's a cat without a picture on it.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
And it's very informative, and I definitely want to talk to you later about that.
Thank you.
And listen to those guys.